Hey everybody, Sean from Media Assault here, and it's time once again for another movie review. This time out I thought I'd do something a little bit different. It's been a while since I've done a Toho movie, and Toho, of course, is most famous for Godzilla and the kaiju films that it produced in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and of course later on in the 90s and in the 2000s. But of course, they did other stuff. They didn't just do kaiju films. And what I thought I would do is an example of one of those films, which is 1958's The H-Man. And I have that in this particular collection that I got from Amazon a couple of years ago. This is the Icons of Sci-Fi Toho collection with Mothra, The H-Man, and Battle in Outer Space. And I have not watched Battle in Outer Space yet. But I watched H-Man for the first time last night, and I have to say that I really enjoyed it, although explaining it is probably going to be a little weird. It's actually a gangster film with sort of a radioactive monster kind of fused into it. As is very typical of 1960s, 1950s, late 1950s movies, science fiction movies from Japan, radioactivity plays a big part in it, and that is because, of course, that Japan was the first and so far only country that has had the misfortune of being attacked by another country who used radioactivity as a weapon. Of course, I'm speaking of the atomic bombs from the end of World War II. And the horror of radioactivity and what it did to Japan, from their psychological perspective all the way through to the actual physical damage, of course, is something that I would have no way of being able to relate to. But I can tell you that it's very obvious that through these films you can see that it became something of nightmares. And the H-Man kind of takes that to a more subtle, almost subversive level than, say, the kaiju films, where Godzilla is this unstoppable force of nature created by radioactivity. Here we've got radioactivity kind of mutating man into something weird and maybe not unstoppable, but something that may represent the next step of evolution as far as the film is concerned. The film centers around a community, and I don't remember the name of the town or the city. I think it's Tokyo that it takes place in. But how this radioactive rain, basically fallout from an H-bomb test, affects the crime underworld of Tokyo. And one of its the crime underworld's minor denizens, I guess you could say, is affected by this radioactivity to the point where he melts, he disappears, and he turns into this radioactive slime that hides in the sewers. And this slime has the ability to melt people when it touches them. And somehow, according to the film, at least someone in the film theorizes that it may retain their psyche, so they may be intelligent radioactive beings. I'm not going to spoil it other than to say that it's kind of a unique combination. It's a very strange combination of elements where you've got this pretty much a gangster police procedural type movie and a radioactive monster movie, and they're just sort of fused together, and it is a lot better than it sounds. Although it's not a fantastic movie, it's actually quite entertaining. It's a little bit slow. It starts off slow. It seems a little bit convoluted at first, but if you give it some time, it kind of works into an enjoyable, maybe slightly mediocre, but still very enjoyable film if you're not somebody who needs hyperactivity on the screen for 2 hours. This is a movie for someone with a little bit of patience, a little bit of time to let the story kind of work into what it wants to do, and I think it's worth seeing, even though, like I said, it's not a fantastic movie. And interestingly enough, it seems to be, as I said, it's from Toho, who is more well known for the Godzilla films. It's aimed at a more adult audience, I think. Even though it was directed by Ishiro Honda, who is responsible for many of the early Godzilla films, and it's got a script by Takeshi Kamura. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but he wrote scripts and co-wrote scripts such as War of the Gargantuas, Rodan, stuff like that. But this seems to be aiming at a more adult audience because there's a lot of references to drugs and gangs and violence and murder, and it's really like they were trying to aim one step higher than their usual target audience. And I have to give Toho kudos for at least trying to do something like that with this film. And one thing I like about it is it's a pretty cohesive piece of work. It is an adult type movie. And when I say adult, I'm not talking racy. I'm just talking in terms of subject matter. But it's pretty cohesive in the fact that it's got this more adult, more mature story. But the special effects, even though sometimes they're a little iffy, they're never horrible. They're never super cheesy. There's just some kind of unfortunate animation that kind of makes it look a little more like a B movie than it ordinarily would have. But overall, the special effects are actually quite good. And although they probably wouldn't stand up to anything put out today, they're still quite entertaining and quite good, and they're not a distraction. Whereas, sometimes with some of the kaiju films and other movies, that sometimes the lack of quality in the special effects, while they are definitely endearing to those of us who love them, they're also something that can be mocked by people who don't really get kaiju films. I think that actually, if you can find it, and the H-Man is only available in this particular collection, and I believe this is now out of print. I could be wrong, but this may be hard to come by. But if you can get it, if you can rent it, or you can find it somewhere, definitely search out the H-Man. I think it's worth your time. I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. And even though that's just a barely above average rating, I still think it's worth seeing as kind of a curio from Toho Studios from 1958. So there you go. That's my review of the H-Man. And stick around for more movie reviews. I actually picked up Oblivion with Tom Cruise and Morgan Freeman today, so I'm probably going to review that very shortly. So stick around for that. As always, feel free to rate, comment, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Take it easy.